Welcome to the Triclinium, a podcast named after the three-sided table used in the Lord's Supper, where you're invited to join the three of us as we think through matters of Christian faith, practice, and community. My name is Jacob Hawley, and I'm here with my co-hosts Eric Bergers and Nate Lead, as always. And today, it is a nice, bright, and sunny day where I am. How about where you guys are?
It is nice, bright, and sunny as well here in Dallas, Texas. Have been loving the weather. It's cooled off a little bit, which is awesome.
Good.
It has been nothing but heat for like 6 months. It's been so hot recently, and so it's really cooled off. Today was only 90, so no, but the last week was really nice. Yeah, the last week.
It's late October.
Yeah, it's been like 60 to 80, like low of 60, high of 80, which has been fantastic. So it's been very different from Oregon, but it's been really good. It's probably been our hottest summer since we moved to Dallas. So it's been kind of a shock.
Oh, that's insane.
The funny thing is, Nate, that when I said it's bright and sunshiny here, what I meant is it's 60 and not raining. That's what I meant. It's totally not sunny outside, but oh man, okay.
Yeah, no, it is sunny and I am sweating when I walk outside.
Oh no.
Oh my god.
That's so brutal. I think that's probably the one thing about Oregon that I miss, particularly is the summers. I think I've learned Kentucky is great for 3 out of the 4 seasons, but their summers are just awful. Like, I think it might just be like a Louisville thing because we're right on the Ohio River. So when summer hits, it is so humid here. Some days it is like unbearable. Yeah. And I work outside in the summers too, so it is like, it's just it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's so sweaty.
I do not envy that.
Yeah, but
you're a real man, Eric.
The fall, winter, and the spring are all like really nice, and Kentucky really pretty too. So Oregon summers were much more mild, and I definitely miss that about Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lauren and I we haven't thrown away any, not thrown away, but we haven't gotten rid of any jackets, sweatshirts, or coats at all. And so we have like several closets, I think. Like our front entry closet is just filled with like heavy layers.
Same here.
And then we have spots in our closet back here that is just filled with heavy layers.
Yeah.
And we're never going to need these. We're only going to need them for like a week at a time, and we have so many coats and jackets and we have no time to use them. So we're frustrated about that.
Nate, how
Oh man.
Oh, this might be too deep of a question. It might take us too far off topic, but how long are you planning on being in Texas? Like, are you going to live there for a long time?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Tell all the listeners in your family and all of them how long
you don't have to answer that question. I'm sorry.
No. It's we are what's the right word for it? I mean, we're at the Lord's mercy. We're following his plan for us, and we're putting everything before the Lord, and that includes where we live. And so right now he has us in Dallas, and with Lauren's new job, it's the best thing that could have happened. So we're here, and we moved here because we felt like he was calling us here. And it's, even though it's not Oregon, even though we're not near family at all, it's bearable because we're following what the Lord has for us. So Yeah, so
well, that's good.
And Eric, you said it might take us off topic, but we don't have a topic. So
that's a good point. Yeah, don't peek behind the curtain.
When I say we don't have a topic, I mean we have too many topics. We're just overflowing with ideas to talk about. So we're just kind of I don't know, seeing where the Spirit leads.
Yeah. Eric, how are you doing? How's Briar doing? Give us a Briar update.
Briar's real good. He develops so much. It feels like every day, but it's probably not that extreme. But yeah, I mean, he's healthy, which is the best out of all things. He's an awful smiley little guy, so I love that about him. He's like starting to develop his laugh, So I've genuinely, and Aaliyah has genuinely got him to laugh a few times, but it's like a real awkward, like almost donkey sounding laugh sometimes, you know? So he's not quite there, but he, like, you can see in his face like he wants to, like he's trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And yeah, Aaliyah has a book that she reads on child development, and he seems like he's on par for all of like the benchmark things where he's supposed to be at as he develops and gets older. So yeah, everything seems to be going smooth there. He's real good.
It is
Does
still
that book
so
have a
crazy.
time where you?
Go ahead, Jacob.
Does that book have a time where you like give them the car keys?
Yeah, the car keys.
Does it go
I
that
believe
far?
that's
Or is it like
what, 16? When do you get your
Chapter 16?
Oh,
yes.
chapter
Yeah.
16. No, I'm saying 16 years
yeah.
old.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also that's why it's chapter
I
16,
getcha.
Eric.
Okay.
It is still so crazy that you're a dad and that you and Aaliyah have a son. I don't know. It just is so weird because I haven't seen you in person this entire time. So I feel like the next time I see you in person, it's just gonna feel like, you know, we just graduated from
I'm
from
sure
college
it will. Yeah,
again.
I'm sure it will.
And it's just like, wait, but you have a baby with
Yeah.
you. Like,
It's Eric and
how long has it been?
It's Eric and this
He's gonna
other
have, like,
entire
socks and
family over
sandals.
here too. Yeah.
Yeah. He's gonna be wearing a flannel, socks and sandals. He's gonna have a pipe in his mouth. You know, the whole 9 yards. Dad
I just
gut.
bought a flannel yesterday. I
waiting
just
on
bought a flannel yesterday, so I'm.
Well, you gotta
I'm
wear
ready
it.
to rock
You
and
gotta
roll.
wear it when you go to meet Nate
Yeah.
again.
Anyways, all right, boys, what are we talking about?
Can I share something that I heard today that I thought
Yeah.
was great? So I've been on, I don't know, this morning, I was on a little bit of a John Foreman kick. I don't know if you guys know who John Foreman
I
is.
actually don't think I do.
John Foreman is he's the lead singer of Switchfoot, so you probably have heard of them. But they're kind of like, they were like the late 90s, early 2000s era, you know, like, we're a Christian band, but we're not going to say that we're a Christian band, or we're going to have, like, kind of vague lyrics so that you don't know that we're a Christian band. But the lead singer is so spiritually deep. It's wild. And so he has these songs that he'll put out that are like his solo work, and they are all explicitly Christian and very like biblically heavy lyrics and just really deep themes. Well, so there was a song off, actually one of the Switchfoot songs I was listening to, and I'm trying to remember what the name of the song is. It might be like Surrender or something like that. I'll have to go look it up later, but it's a song that's talking about giving up control, and so it starts off, I don't like to admit when I'm wrong and need gifts of forgiveness instead of applause. And he goes on and he says things like, you know, give me the strength to let go, give me the strength to surrender, give me the strength to stop holding on. I've been holding on so long. And so it's kind of a prayer. They've gotten more explicitly Christian in their recent years. And there's a part in the song, like the crescendo of the song, where he says, I am lightning and you are the cloud. And I had never really thought about those lyrics until today. I've heard the song probably 100 times, and I just now registered what he said. I'm lightning and you are the cloud. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, what does he mean? I'm the lightning and you're the cloud, right? So he's talking to God. I am the lightning and you're the cloud. And so I'm thinking, well, like, a cloud maybe sends forth lightning, but usually we would think like thunder, right, with lightning. And I'm like, well, what is he trying to say? And then I realized that I learned somewhere, and you guys probably know this as well, that the way lightning works is actually not that it comes down from the cloud, but that it's the static electricity that's built up on Earth, I believe, that finds a release in the cloud. So it actually goes up. It goes to meet the cloud. And so if you think about it that way, you have all of this he's talking about control and surrender, right? And he says, I'm the lightning and you're the cloud, right? I am this pent up energy. I am this I've been holding on for so long, right? I'm on. It's, you can almost think of the electrons like getting excited, and it's like they're trying to go somewhere, but they don't know where to go, and they can't let go. And the cloud comes by, and it gives them that perfect opportunity to let go. And then it's just this explosion that goes up into the cloud, and you know, you can hear it from miles away. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, wow, what a brilliant lyric, right? Like, I am the lightning and you are the cloud. So anyways, I don't know, just an interesting, I would say, semi-pastoral analogy, right? Because it's a very pastoral song, right? He's singing from the guts of his, it's a very honest song, right? He's singing about his relationship with God, and from the depths of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was something that I thought was nice.
No, that's
today.
great. And if that is what he meant by that lyric, then yeah, I think that's good stuff, and that's great, because what's great about it is that it got you, the listener, to think about that lyric and to gain something positive for the glory of the Lord beyond him just singing and writing the lyrics. So I think that's great. And, you know, maybe this could be something that's good to talk about. You just got me thinking in general about Christian, I guess, media or Christian kind of art and production. Because in my opinion, I'm not sure like Christian art and media is in like a great place, like in the Protestant realm of things. Like, because I think for a long time, particularly, I guess I'm thinking more like in the movie business, like Christian art has just been terrible and awful, and I don't think it always has been. So it seems like Christians dominated, like, man, almost all of the sciences and the arts, like, for a long time, like, specifically in the medieval era onwards, you know.
Right,
and,
academia.
Yeah, and academia as well. And then something changed, and all of a sudden, like, we're flipping out, like, movies that just tank, and, like, songs that nobody knows what they're talking about, or they just repeat one lyric, like, 18 times, and we're supposed to gain something from that. And I think a lot about this, like, what went wrong, and why are we not getting more songs like the ones, or art, or you name it, you know, in that kind of media realm that's like pushing us to think like you just did with that song. Like, what happened? And is it even possible for Christians to retake that industry, if you will?
Yeah, Eric, that's a great question, man. I love talking about this. I love thinking about Christian media. I think first to look at like kind of the history of media in general. You know, we saw Christian media and movies flip when the culture flipped to media and movies as well. You know, movies when they first came about in the early 20th century, and then really developed into, you know, fame and popularity in the late 20th century. That just became the new like cultural phenomenon, to go to the movies and, oh, what's the newest movie and what's the newest action movie or whatever else. And it was just the newest way to tell stories. You know, people connect with stories so well. And I think that for so long the issue, and that this isn't to say that there hasn't been any good stories about Christianity or anything like that, but that the majority of Christian films have put message first, and more of the filming and the art, like the art aside, because they want to focus so bad on telling you the message and getting what they want you to get out of it first, rather than telling a good story first. You know, so I think like a good example is, and a lot of people bring this up, is God's Not Dead, right? So that movie, that when you look back on it, it's like, wow, this is a really bad movie. Yeah. You know, and why is it bad? Well, the story doesn't make sense. You know, the characters are half baked. The conflict that seems like it's, you know, straight just out of somebody's mind who's just like, oh, this would make for a good whatever. You know, it doesn't have much basis in actual reality, at least for a lot of people. That's kind of what the criticism has been, because they want to get the message across so badly. And so now I think a great example on the flip side, and not everybody is going to like this and not everybody agrees, but The Chosen, for example, puts story first, but it's a story about Christ. It's a story about the faith building. And they put story first, and on that side, they do take creative license to dive into the characters more than what we see in Scripture. And I think that's where a lot of the criticism comes from, because people are asking, well, how much basis do we have to show this side of Peter or this side of Matthew or whoever?
Yeah, right.
But they're telling the story first, and they're focusing on the art and focusing on the actual plot, you know, and constructing a well crafted, a really thoughtful TV series. And I mean, you cannot deny the popularity of that show.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's because they put the art first. You know, they want to make a compelling TV show, and they want to tell a compelling story. And there's no better story to tell, no more compelling story than that of the gospel. So it's really interesting when we look at Christian media and Christian movies. They get in their own way a lot, you know, because they want to focus so badly on telling the message that they forget to, you know, make a good movie, you know, because those are kind of two separate things. You know, you can make a really good sermon and get your point across really well, but that doesn't translate to a movie really well, you know, because a movie has to have highs and lows, and it has to have a general storyline throughout.
Right.
You know, and in music, another thing to think about too is, you know, I think a lot of people are making really good songs, and people are making
maybe I was a little harsh on the
honor
music
the
industry.
No.
Yeah.
No, definitely. But what we see amplified is that doesn't honor the Lord. You know, I think you can listen to any song on Apple Music right now. Just pull up Apple Music, any top 10 song. It is just horrendous. You know, like awful celebration of sin in almost every way possible. And so I think there are people that do make God-honoring songs, but it's not what's either popular, and it's not what's promoted by a lot of the major studios. So it's several-fold, you know, a couple of issues just surrounding that. But anyway, sorry. I mean, I think that there are some movies that, I mean, there's one I can't think about. I can't remember the name of it, and I haven't seen it, but I've been wanting to see it for a little while, about a missionary that goes to remote South America, and basically he just tries to interact with a indigenous tribe of people. And but I do remember people mentioning, like, oh man, this movie is just really, really good in general. And that's about a missionary going and trying to reach these people, which is, you know, really just a metaphor for how the Lord tries to reach us. So I don't know. I think that there have been God-honoring movies in the past, but movie studios certainly don't want to pick them up. You know, when Pilgrim's Progress came out, I mean, what was that, 17th century, 18th century?
Yes, John Bunyan's. I think he's 17th. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, when you just look at the culture in general, you know, how many people would profess to have a faith in Christ, you know, or at least be cultural Christians? You're looking at the vast majority of people. And it's interesting too, just because, I mean, when you look at America's foundings, you know, we were founded by Christians or people who had faith, and it was built by people who had faith. And so you got to see the impact of people with faith. They built up the culture, and then slowly the culture has just that culture has started to fade, and we see, you know, the number of self-identifying Christians in the U.S. I think that we're at 60% now of people who identify as Christians in the U.S. That's what I heard last year when I went to an outreach conference. And Australia right now is at 50%. And if you look at the trends, America follows Australia, but we're about 10 years behind. And so the theory is that in about 10 years, America will be at 50% cultural Christians. So, at least self-identifying Christians. Now, I think that who was that? Barna Group. They're the ones that ran the survey, and they had a couple of qualifying questions like, do you go to church once a month? How many times do you pray? Like, do you read? How many times do you read the Bible in a month? Kind of those questions, and so I think they were kind of building those off of those qualifying questions. So, we've seen just the decline of cultural Christianity, and we've seen the increase in a secular culture, at least a culture that's not really interested, or I guess is more interested in seeing films, music, books that focus on either, I don't even know what to call it, because I wouldn't even, I don't know, it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of different facets to it.
Yeah,
it's hard to nail down.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe we've cracked open a can that has too many worms to count in it. But Jacob, what's your thoughts? Kind of, I know we've kind of we're pretty broad. We're pretty broad right now, but what do you think?
Yeah. So I think, firstly, the detachment begins with the Reformation. There's a very strong impetus in the more reformed side of the Reformation so Calvin, Zwingli, that group, to dump images, any kind of sacred images or anything like that from worship. So icons, but even more than icons, just there's a line in Calvin's Institutes near the beginning when he's talking about religious symbols, and he says that the church should not even be adorned with a crucifix because, quoting Paul, if you would preach the gospel rightly, it would be as if Christ was crucified before your very eyes. I think that's 1 Corinthians that he's quoting. And so I think what happened was there was a sort of iconoclasm, a sort of breakdown of artistry in the church, because the thing that has always been the catalyst for artistic venture is the good, the true, and the beautiful. And because the Christian faith has an articulated contents for truth, goodness, and beauty, when it stopped doing that, you see this massive drop-off in religious art. And a very quick movement, right? Within a couple of centuries, you see a movement into more modern forms of art, which are, people joke about something looking like modern art because it's just trash. It has no meaning. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's very isolated to a specific context or culture to a degree that it's almost inaccessible to most humans.
Yeah.
So that, I think that was the start, was the Reformation. And then I think what precipitated that is a slow impatience that grew with the Industrial Revolution. So that's my theory, is that the Industrial Revolution and the technologizing, that's not a word, the technological...
Let's go with it.
Sure, yeah, the innovation that happened in the Industrial Revolution, and then into the technological age that we now inhabit, has made us more and more impatient. And I would say one of the markers of impatience is a desire to know the truth quickly without, the truth has to be simple. It can't be complex. I shouldn't have to think long and hard about it. I shouldn't have to wrestle with it. It should just be clear. And I think that's one of the most damaging beliefs that the church has held, because the scriptures are so obviously difficult to wrestle with, and so obviously are not meant to be you read it once and you don't ever have to read it again, right? It's very much a work of literature that requires full meditative engagement and lots of work. But we've kind of we've dropped the ball there, and I think that part of the reason we're unable to create works of art that matter now is because all of our truths are simple truths. We're unable. We've lost the patience to deal with complex truths, so everything you get is something like a God's not dead. The world hates Christians, but there are some simple arguments I can put forth that can simply destroy this simple atheist who has simple arguments against my simple God, right? So it's the whole thing falls apart because you have simple characters, you have simple arguments, you have a simple message. And that simple message, it tanks because it's just not good art, right? Art draws you in. If you don't feel like you're grappling with art, then it's probably not very good art.
That's a great point. I mean, man, that just rings true in my ears that we've traded complexity and maybe, just even the ability to wrestle with truth for simple truths. It's like, let's just take that complex idea, let's boil it down to its 5-second one sentence, and let's just roll with that.
Right.
But man, that is so true.
Yeah, I think you really put your thumb on something there. I think I have my reservations about what you said, Jacob, but I think in spirit I can agree with you. Like, because one thing I think what you said would touch is the perspicuity of Scripture, that doctrine that comes out of the Reformation.
One of my least favorite doctrines. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you say that, but I would hold to an idea of the perspicuity of Scripture. I think even just the definition of what that is varies with different Protestants, and so I don't think I really want to discuss that here and now. I don't want to distract from what we're talking about, but the very idea that we have kind of gone into this mindset, and honestly, this is probably one of my bigger frustrations with the puritanical group, the Puritans. As great as they are, I like them a lot. I like reading them. There was with Calvin and then furthermore into the Puritans, there certainly was a pushback against kind of iconography, I guess you could say, and depictions and art in general. And that I think that has hurt the church in certain areas, and I think it has kind of diluted everything down into hyper simplicity, I guess you could say, and it stinks because all of that tradition, I guess you could say, and beauty that the church kind of gleaned and gathered as time went on. We went, like, part of the Reformation, some folks within it went too far by shedding, like, kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. Like, and I think that's showing in the culture right now, because I think a lot of people in everyday culture are kind of seeing, particularly in America, are seeing the craziness that's going on and the just wild ideas that are coming out of secularism, and they're looking to hold on to anything that actually has a firm foundation. And I think art and beauty had its firm foundation in the church originally. And the fact that many Protestants can't hold on to that and use that as sort of a outreach to these people that are searching for something, it gives more precedence to folks like the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church, because they can say, look how old and beautiful and great we are over here, and look how, like, dry and dirty and gross these gyms that the Protestants have over here. And then they end up going and joining something that they know very little about, just off of sheer beauty. So hopefully that's all making sense, but I do think you've put your thumb on something important, and that is that Protestants have kind of, at least some forms of Protestantism, have kind of thrown out beauty and art as a result of trying to shed some of the poor doctrines of Rome at the time of the Reformation.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, I'm not saying that like Calvin and his contemporaries and those that came after him were necessarily wrong. They were obviously pendulum swinging a little bit too far. But I think I do think that like I think the big problem, and this is actually something that can be, this is a principle that can be extrapolated out of this, is that there are times when our culture or our generation makes a change to adjust for what we're experiencing in our world that the generations after us won't be equipped to handle, but we are. So so this is what I mean by that. If you read the Puritans, or if you read Calvin specifically, you'll still get a lot of very illustrative language and a lot of like deep, insight, right?
Oh,
they
absolutely.
lived in a much more meditative culture, right?
Yes.
So they were able to maintain something like an iconoclasm and still hold a very deep spirituality and
Yes.
entertain very complex truths. The problem is that nowadays we don't have the meditative society that can hold that, and so you have this proposition that all truths have to be simple, that we shouldn't, that we have to be careful with certain forms of artwork, all this kind of stuff. You have a proposition and a legacy that's been drawn into a culture where it's actually doing more harm than it is doing good, because it's in the wrong soil, right? So it's not that it was wrong for the time frame. They definitely needed to cut back on some of the adornments that the
Yes.
Catholic Church had held
Yes.
on to. The problem is that you can't. It's not a rule. It was an adjustment, and so that adjustment just kept going until it became a rule, and that was.
Yes.
I think that's where we became problematic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. I think you're spot on. Nate, what's your thoughts?
Man, I love talking about all this. Well, for one, because I love movies.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's interesting to ask the question. Well, why hasn't, the Bible is still the best-selling book in the world. I looked it up. I asked the question: is the Bible still the best-selling book? And the Guinness Book of World Records has the Bible as a best-selling book. They estimate that more than 5 billion copies of the Bible have been printed. 5 billion. That's insane, right?
Yeah.
I
Like,
just
that's-
bought 2 of them, so that's why it's still at
So
the
there you go.
Guinness World Record.
I mean, Jacob's just adding to the total here. So
Yeah,
I believe it's
no,
also
I'm the
the
one
most-
keeping it in the lead, baby.
I believe it's ironically, I believe it's also the most stolen book as well. Probably
Yeah.
probably still number one
I
and
wouldn't doubt
all time and current. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's just hilarious, but it's also, I mean, for one, I think it speaks to a beautiful truth that the Bible is written in a very, if we're, as we're talking about art, the Bible is written in a very attractive style, in a very attractive manner, because it's written in stories. Like it tells us these deep theological truths about humanity, about God, about our relationship between the two, about sin, and all these things, but it tells it through the story, and the Bible just begs you to see yourself in the story, and and that's how we pull those truths out, and that's why people keep going back to it, and that's why it kind of shocks me that there aren't more faithful adaptations of biblical stories into film or other stories. It's like how many amazing stories are in the Bible. There's almost too many to tell. Like, you could make an amazing TV show just on the story of Israel. Like, as soon as they're in the wilderness, like going through all those trials, all their interactions with different tribes, and their quest into the promised land. Like, that is an amazing story with really developed and deep characters. In Moses, in Joshua. Oh man, I'm gonna mess it up. Anyway, there's just these incredible stories that haven't been fully developed or even adapted, but even the ones that have been, like Prince of Egypt,
Yeah.
that's like the one that comes to my mind.
Yes.
People, like secular people, will still point to that and be like, that was one of my favorite movies as a child.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's an amazing story, man. Like, it's so well thought out, and because it's true. It's just it is rooted in everything that we as humans can connect to. In love and acceptance and finding mission, and standing up against injustice, seeking justice, rescuing of an entire people, and then the amazing acts of God that come into that. It's an amazing story, and that was developed into an animated movie, but still people point to that and will rewatch it over and over again. And it's just interesting that the other attempts, even The Passion of the Christ, that's also another movie that people keep going back to, and Mel Gibson, that put his name on the board, it was his, what is that word?
Here's the interesting thing. Let me throw something up about movies in particular, because I think movies, you guys might disagree, but movies have been the category of art where I think Christians have stunk the most, in my opinion. And I think
I would agree with that.
There's something to be said about that, because movies haven't existed forever. I think it's easier. It has historically been easier for Christians to write good stories, such as, go back in time, the Chronicles of Narnia, such as...
Yeah, I was thinking about Narnia as well.
Yeah, Narnia, such as Pilgrim's Progress, such as so on and so forth. Because writing has been an art form forever, and the Bible itself is in writing. And so we can kind of take
probably one of the first art forms,
forms,
it's just communication.
styles, characters... Sure. Directly, and it's more translatable. Whereas movies, it's not just writing. You can actually see expressions, feelings, emotions, and so on and so forth in a film. And maybe we're not giving enough credit to Christian movie producers, because maybe this will just take time, because movies are still relatively new phenomenon.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it will take time. I think Christians and Christian studios will only get better. For one, just by the scientific process of theory and failure, trial and error.
Theory and failure.
Yeah, seeing what works and what people enjoy. But I don't know. I just think that movies play such an important role in people's development, just because of what they can show. Movies about war show the horrors of war. Every World War II movie, it just takes you back. Even though we've never lived through World War II, or we might know somebody, or our grandparents, or I don't know if you guys have a grandparent that fought in World War II, but I think that we're so removed. But seeing a movie in World War II, it just reminds you of what happened, the evil that people faced, the sacrifice that people made, the horrors of war. It can just transport you to that different time period. And I think that movies just have such a capacity to really bring the stories of the Bible and introduce or reintroduce them in such a cool new way. I'll say one more thing, and then I'll pass it off to you, Jacob. The other day, I saw an AI-generated piece of art, and it was of the Israelites being led by the pillar of fire at night. And the AI was able to generate it so that the pillar of fire was able to spin almost. So it looked like a tornado of fire, and the Israelites were following behind it. It was just an amazing image, because I'd never been able to picture what does a pillar of fire look like. And then to just see that, and even, it's just an idea that somebody had about what that might have looked like. But to see that, I was like, oh my gosh, it gave me such a perspective of awe and greatness of God that, I'm kind of lost for words on how to describe it, just because it was so interesting to see that actually be brought to light, so. And the way that special effects are, I just think that there's such an opportunity for Christians and for movie studios to make amazing movies that really draw out those incredible stories from the Bible And then, that's also just another way to introduce people to the truths of the gospel.
Yeah. That's really good. I was gonna say that Theory and Failure is my favorite Dostoevsky novel. That was a joke. But I think you're hitting on. I think Eric said something that has it's kind of blossoming right now in my head. That is a really good point, because the amount of Christians that have embraced filmography as an art form is much, much smaller than in the world. It's kind of I think it's probably because it's associated with Hollywood, and Hollywood's kind of a grimy industry. So
Jacob, let me say something really quick before you move
Sure.
on, and it's just super fast. The other thing, because I think this will add to your thoughts.
Sure.
The other thing about movies too is many of the things that you see around today, such as education, hospitals, hospital care work, science itself has its foundation and roots in the church. Christians started these organizations pretty clearly historically. I don't know that you could say that for movies. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
So I wonder if in the playing out of things, movies just won't be a thing for Christian. But sorry, go ahead. I think that'll add something to what you're going to say. So
that was great. Yeah, no, it's not a native industry, so that's a huge point. I was gonna say I think the amount of Christian directors is pretty small, I would say, and we forget, I think, because we've been given a selection of movies that's curated. We forget how many movies are made that are hot garbage in the secular world as well. And so, and anyone who doubts that,
right.
if they just watch Sharknado, they'll understand.
Hey, I love Sharknado. Don't you tear apart Sharknado.
Bro, I've seen all 5 of them. I love them so much, but I love them because they are horrible.
Yeah, right.
That's their appeal. It's not like I watch it for the character development.
There
is no character development. There's chainsaws and sharks, and it's a tremendous film experience. But to think about, maybe we just have had very few of our movies, because we have even a shrunk down population of directors, or a smaller market share there.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that market share. Yep.
Right. We probably just haven't seen very many movies that were worthy to be brought to the front. It would be the same as saying the amount of school films, let's say, that are made that are high quality are very, very low. There might be a few, right? But there's just not a huge market share there, right? It doesn't mean that they're doing a terrible job, or that they're cutting corners or things. They just don't have the budget. They don't have the backing. They don't have the amount of actors and talent. They don't have the talent pool. That's huge, right? I think you could say the same of the Christians, because of our lack of adapting the film industry into our circles, because it's not native, right? But I also think that there are a couple of films, and maybe this will pivot us a little bit, so you can tell me if you still want to talk about this area a little more, but there are some films that I've really enjoyed, Christian films, that weren't made by Christians, or were made by secular directors that happened to be Christian, right? So the Coen brothers, I don't know, I think they're Jewish actually, but they make some spectacular films. Martin Scorsese has made a film called Silence, which is my favorite Christian movie of all time, and it is
really
not. I mean, I think it's so good because it allows the watcher, the audience, to sit in a very tense and complex set of questions and circumstances for a long period of time. Wasn't Unbroken, isn't that a big Christian film that came out?
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that it was directed by a Christian
I think
person.
Unbroken was directed by Angelina Jolie.
Yeah. So there's a whole other category of film that is not a faith-based film, but it is a Christian story that's being portrayed. The Narnia films are a great example of this, right? Like,
Yeah,
they were not
absolutely.
undertaken by some Christian agency, you know? And they were pretty good.
Yeah. Let me throw another question out there, guys, and let's see where it goes.
All right.
Considering the fact that film does not seem to have its foundation set on the church, I guess you could say. It was not founded by Christians like many other institutions, if you will, were. Is it something that's bound to just not take root and die someday? And my parallel that I kind of want to offer for thought as well is back in the day with some of the early church fathers, what was really popular at the time under the Roman Empire was the gladiatorial games, right?
This is a great example.
Yeah, the gladiatorial games were near central to Roman entertainment at the time. Two very key church fathers that I can think of, and you can fact check me on this, wrote strongly against the gladiatorial games were Tertullian and Cyprian, if I remember correctly. Both very key influential church figures at the time. And below and behold, the gladiatorial games are not a thing today, right? It has died and passed on. Is that a fair parallel to make with movies in the film industry? Is it doomed to die, or is it something that could be quote-unquote redeemed by Christians and used for the glory of God?
It's very interesting. I think that's a great question. I think that the parallel breaks down because a gladiatorial game is a lot harder for a Christian to infiltrate and then change the message of, like it is a singular thing, it's a fight, and
Right.
and so
Yeah.
Christians can't take that and adopt it for their own as easily as a movie can. So I think that's where it breaks down, but it is a good parallel when you talk about the impact it had on culture.
Yes.
Because that was the thing, man. Let's go to the Colosseum and let's go see. I mean, they had
Some dudes get
Colosseums-
ripped apart. Yeah.
Yeah, they had Colosseums everywhere.
Christians get ripped apart.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
were all over the place. These little arenas where races were performed, where like Olympic style games were performed, where gladiatorial barbarism was performed, like these insane acts. It's a good parallel. Jacob, what are you thinking?
I think that a better parallel is right up the same alley. It's the theaters that they would have.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, so you have
probably,
plays.
yeah.
I was thinking
And-
about plays too.
If
So
I'm not
there's the
mistaken, though,
medium.
I think theater and plays largely in the Roman context at the time of the New Testament and the early church were heavily involved or correlated with prostitution as well, if I'm not mistaken.
That's from what I've gathered. There was something lewd going on at those things. It was not like like theater today.
Right. I just want to be clear on that, because
Sure.
some people might think we're saying like they're going to think William Shakespeare or something, and
No.
it was not that. Then
No.
it was
There
like
was-
a very sexual, sexually immoral experience at the time. So I just want to be
Yes.
clear on that. But go ahead.
No, that's very good. It's more of a like. It was like a lot of times the plays were the reenactments of the legends of the gods and of great warriors, and oftentimes those had within them, I think, pretty much just like reenactments of sexual scenes, and so I think that's what I've gathered from it. There may have also been a prostitution aspect. I just haven't read much into this, but I know that John Chrysostom, I think he threatened to withhold communion from anybody who had gone to the plays in the past week or whatever. So
I think that's
it
right.
was a big
yeah.
deal. Yeah.
I remember reading something about that where a couple of church fathers were very against the plays, and I'm pretty sure it had something to do with like a prostitution element to them, like a
might have
hyper
been, yeah.
sexually immoral element to it.
Yeah,
I'd have to pull some sources to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure there was something along
So
those lines.
with those though, we do see Christians that have taken the opportunity to write a screenplay or to they've taken that arena, we could call it, not the Colosseum arena, but the arena of the stage and of the play.
Yeah.
And they use that in order to share the message of the gospel, and to preach the truth. So I think that's pretty clear that we have seen that, which then we could extrapolate back into this area of film and say, there's no reason why Christians can't use film in order to spread the message of the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, you could maybe say, and this might be a way over-exaggeration, and anybody who listens to or watches sports is going to think this is egregious. That's fine. You could say that there is a sanitized adaptation of something close to the games and the activities therein in some sports that we see nowadays. My first two are kind of like UFC, boxing, that same kind of like that bloodlust or that desire to see people just go at it with like the most ferocity. And I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. Like I took Taekwondo growing up. I know there is something that feels very natural to humanity about fights and especially I think if both parties are accepting of the consequences. I think there's the problem with the Colosseum, the horrible problem with the Colosseum was that there were innocent people who were thrown in there without
it was used
consent.
as forms of punishment.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. And it was usually to the death. So like that's the other thing is like you don't see that in a lot of boxing arenas and stuff. And probably I don't know if I want to throw football in there, but I would say football has a lot of the same like that aggressive. There's the strategic, but there's also a lot of aggression, right? Not the same level of aggression that you'd see in like baseball or basketball, right? There's a lot of bodily, contact and stuff. So there is a different, like you could say both of those are entertainment, but like a play or theater is more of a medium than sports is. And this might just be getting into like theory, but like there has to be something there is something very different between sports or activities like the Colosseum where you're watching something take place in front of you. Some sort of activity. There is a huge difference between that and like the ability to write a play or to film a movie or to write a book or things like that. They both could be categorized as entertainment, but they are very different.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So here, maybe like a baseline question you could ask when you're approaching some sort of. You could do this as broad as sports, media, something like that. That Christians should probably have in the forefront of their mind when they're approaching these different things is what I'm participating in, watching, what have you. Does it have the possibility to bring glory to God in some form or fashion?
What a Calvin.
Backing up to the gladiatorial games. That seems to be the clearest one where you could say no. Because people are being ripped to shreds. People made in the image of God are being. It's a very violent and perverse event in its very nature, and so.
But what if someone argued so was the wars of David and his mighty men, but they are they're glorified in the scriptures for their kill count, right? Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands, and that's like a whole,
Yeah, the quickest refutation is that those were for the glory of the Lord,
those were also wars.
Of the Lord could still be, so that God's purpose would ultimately be fulfilled. I think that's
those were also wars being fought, I believe, as well, like either in defense or at the command of God themselves. So like the gladiatorial games are exhibitions, like for fun.
But a rebuttal would be that the same bloodlust or similar bloodlust that led to the Colosseums also led to the crucifixion of Christ, and that was to the glory of God.
Yeah. I didn't want to go down that road.
Sorry, I'm just pushing on it. I'm just pushing on it.
Yeah. No, I think those are healthy questions to ask, but generally speaking, I think it could be agreeable that the gladiatorial games in their nature were used for heinous reasons, and I'm not sure how you get around it being honoring to God in some sort of way. Whereas,
I'm a borderline pacifist, so like I'm totally. I'm in your boat there. I just like to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, that's
or
fine.
Jesus's advocate, as it should be called.
But I want to touch the other things we talked about too. So like football or like the UFC or something like that. While it clearly has some of the elements that the gladiatorial games had, it seems to be, man, I hate this word, but I'm gonna use it, a bit more neutral because, like you said, there's an agreement from both parties to engage in this activity. It's purely for entertainment reasons, and although people can be hurt, most anybody who are engaged in those activities are going to tell you that they do it for fun. Like it's something that's fun to them and they like to do it. Yes, it can become idolatrous, but so on and so forth. And then movies, when you go even farther, are much more apt to be able to be used to, like Nate said in the past, have a message that is directly a presentation of the gospel or some sort. So in my mind, I guess what I'm getting at here is there's different categories of different events that I think we have to put these things into, where the gladiatorial games are probably much, in my mind at least, much more towards the end of unredeemable because of the very nature of it, whereas something like movies are I don't even know that you could say redeemable, but movies are towards the end where yes, it absolutely can be used for the glory of God. So
I think a question to go right in line with that, so the question is, one question that you asked, Eric, is am what I about to participate in is that able to be used for the glory of God? I think another question that you could ask in line with that when we approach, I don't know, anything like this, movies or looking at historical events, what was the intention behind that event?
Yes.
What was that event originally intended to do? The gladiatorial games is a good example of an event that was intended to, for one, satiate a lot of the people's desire for bloodlust and for sport, but it was also intended for the emperor or for the ruling class to punish their opponents, to strike fear into their citizens. And so at the core of it, what is it at its core? It's like, wow, it's not good.
Yes.
Yes.
So, when we look at movies, okay, what is the intent behind like a movie? And you could even ask this about individual movies. What's the intent of this movie? But a movie is a visual way to tell a story.
Yeah.
It's hard to define it outside of that. It's an original intent. You could say, like, you could bring up Saving Private Ryan. What's the original intent of this movie? It's to tell a story about a group of men going in to save one of their own, to show the horrors of war, to show what people have to go through, to show the sacrifices made. You can look at the original intent of that. And, what's the original intent of plays? Well, to tell a story, maybe a gruesome story, or, maybe to replay or to reimagine some ancient myths and have some very inappropriate sections of it. That's the distortion of it, but at its core, it's intended to tell a story. And I think in that way, there's a saying that God's the ultimate storyteller. He's actively writing history right now, and he knows all of history. You know, he's written it. And so the ways that, I mean, yeah, I've just lost all my thoughts. So anyway, God is an amazing storyteller. He gives us his truth in stories. Humans have always told stories. So art is really just communication, and there are different mediums for how we communicate. And so I think art may be broadly defined as a means in which we communicate. So a movie is art because it is a means in which we communicate. Whether that's a story or a lesson or an ideal or a mission or some truth or whatever. But movies are, like you mentioned, they're fairly new, and they're not started by Christians, and Christians are typically late adopters to things, to new technological advances, and there are still people that reject technological advances that would claim onto the mantle of Christianity. And so I think that Christians are only going to get better at making movies because at its core, it's meant to tell a story. And God's story is ultimately the best story. It is the greatest story. It's the story of redemption, of love, of peace, of joy, friendship, of reconciliation. It is all these things. And I think Christians have told that story in paintings, in plays, in every other medium of art. And I think movies is just another one of those that we're trying to do well, if that makes sense. Jacob, what do you got?
Yeah, Eric, I think your question originally of is it comparable to the gladiatorial games? I think the reason that it falls apart is because one is an activity and one is, like Nate said, communication. It's a medium for communication. You're not really communicating a message with the gladiatorial games, nor are you really doing that with sports. What?
Fear?
I think that's a byproduct.
Sure, that's fair. But like, it's not a complex message, right? It's one of those simple ones. So you could say that. But I think that's the key, is that in our fleeing from what we thought was an avenue to idolatry or affluence or basically just having too much, being too gaudy, right? What our flight from that locked us out of a very potent sector of communication, and and they couldn't have foreseen that, right? I don't think they could have probably foreseen that, because I don't think it was as powerful as it has become, right? Art was not as powerful probably in the days of John Calvin as it is now. The kinds of experiences, especially as we move in towards like VR and augmented reality, is like you have a whole new horizon. But I think the thing that we have to keep at the forefront of our mind is that Christianity is a religion of the word. It is a religion of the message, a religion of communication, because God in his Son has communicated to us. And so if we forget that and we begin locking ourselves out of certain avenues of communication, I think we're dooming ourselves. And obviously the kingdom will prosper and thrive, but we will be adopting vitriol or prejudices against avenues for gospel impact that perhaps we should not be doing.
Yeah, perhaps we could I'd be interested maybe to do a part 2 to this as well, and get into some particulars of like where we go from here. But I think like, just to quickly say what I mean by that is like, because immediately what you're going to run into, and I've thought a number of things as we've mentioned different things along the way, is things like, well, what do we do with the chosen in the second commandment? Or what do we do? And that was, partly the problem with John Calvin and the Puritans, and their objection that they raise. And, like, I guess what I'm getting at is, how do Christians do art, media, so on and so forth, well? How do we do it to the glory of God? And, I think our ultimate basis is Scripture. From my perspective, it has to. We're probably going to disagree at the end of the day, but I think if people's intent is to do it in accordance with the Scriptures, hopefully that's going to bring about good gospel fruit in the future. But yeah, I think there's so much more here that we could continue to discuss and further go on. But I had something I was going to say, but I forget what it was. So somebody else say something. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, yeah, I'd be interested, and maybe we just port this over to another, maybe not a part 2, but something like just a full episode on how Christians should see the second commandment, because that's a huge question, and
yeah, right.
It could umbrella a lot of things. So
yeah,
Certainly.
like, something that stepping aside from, I don't want to prolong us too more if we got to get going here, but stepping aside from movies for a second and going back into like books, something like I'm really kind of upset that Christians seem to have lost like over time is fantasy novels like the Chronicles of Narnia and like the Lord of the Rings. You could possibly throw Pilgrim's Progress in there as well. Maybe it's more of an allegory than a fantasy. But like each of these things were like so impactful. Like the Lord of the Rings, for example, isn't explicitly like a Christian work. I'm not going to get into, it was written by a Roman Catholic, so what do we do about that? But like there's so clearly like biblical themes, Christian themes in the Lord of the Rings that secular people like love this work. It was impactful on the culture in some sort of way. Like I'm so saddened that we've kind of lost that, and I'd love to read more great fantasy novels or something like that, or more great allegories like the Pilgrim's Progress or something along those lines. And something just seems to be slipping away in Christians' ability to, and maybe that's just the time that we're in, maybe like because the church historically has always had its times of triumph and glorious times, but there's also been clearly times where Christians have been oppressed, fallen into sin, much like Israel. They're even doing terrible things to other people. So what have you. And maybe it's just the times, but I just want to maybe put a cap on what we've said here is like there is potential for Christians and Christianity in general to take these different art forms and use it for the glory of God and the spreading of the gospel, in my opinion. And I think each of you would agree on that idea as well. And perhaps my encouragement is that, like, for Christians to go out there and to do these things and produce good forms of art, like the song that Jacob listened to that got this whole discussion rolling, to be able to shed light on Jesus Christ and the gospel and what he did for us in history. And I think that potential is there with these different art forms. I'm just sad that at kind of the state that it seems like we're in. And
Absolutely.
Maybe we can discuss how to get there.
Yeah, and we should save all of those questions for the next one, because I love this topic. I want to keep going. So I made a note that we're going to talk about why we don't see as many Christian allegories popularized in novels, because I think Narnia is a great example of that. Somebody who wants to take their faith and write a story, because C.S. Lewis wrote those stories for his grandchildren or for his children, or for the younger generation. So he wrote these stories in order to communicate the timeless truth of God seeking his people, right? So of reconciliation and of good ultimately triumphing over evil. Why don't we see that as much anymore? So we're definitely going to discuss that.
One note I could leave it on here as well, Nate, as kind of like a stamp on it as well, is, man, maybe as like a hyper encouragement for Christians to get out there and do these things if they're interested in these pursuits, is if Christians don't do it, somebody else is going to. and you're going to keep getting movies that are going to do the opposite of bringing glory to God or different art forms. So
yeah, it's okay to engage in these forms because ultimately it's communication. You know, we are writing a story that seeks to communicate the timeless truth of the gospel, and that of God reaching his people. You know, so it's good to make movies, it's good to write books, it's good to write plays and poetry and pursue these artistic endeavors because it does bring glory to God, because it
has the potential to, at least.
Yes,
yeah.
it has the potential to glorify God and to approach people where they are. You know, somebody will engage with the Chronicles of Narnia, but might not engage with the gospel. But Narnia might be a stepping stone into the gospel. So, anyway, we say we're going to wrap it up and then we keep going. I could talk about this for a long, long time, but another great song by Switchfoot. I've been thinking about this for the last hour. Another great song by Switchfoot is... I just forgot it. No.
Oh, no.
Hold on.
Jacob,
I'm
you
going
look
to
like
look
you're
up the
say
one
something.
that I was talking about because I want to give it the right name. So
I think
got
it's
time.
called We Were Meant to Live. We Were Meant to Live.
Meant to live. Yep.
There it is.
Great
yeah.
song.
That was like
One
my
of the
first
big ones.
song that I heard from Switchfoot. And if you haven't listened to that one, go and listen to it. I mean, it is awesome. Mid-2000s like rock. It's super cool.
Yes. Yes. Very yes. Mid 2000s is like actually I think it was early 90s. Late 90s. So yes, very much.
There you go.
Let's see, where is it? It's on this album. I'm almost there. The Strength to Let Go is what it's called. The Strength to Let Go.
There we
if
go.
you guys want to listen
Meant to
to
Live.
it,
The Strength
off
to Let
of
Go.
the Yes, and the Strength to Let Go is off of the Native Tongue album. Yeah, I would love to talk more about this. I have lots of thoughts, so let's reconvene at another time. But until then, thank you guys so much for listening to the Triclinium podcast. If you have any questions or comments or ideas for us to talk about, go ahead and email the sophomorosofficial@gmail.com email address, and we will get back to you, hopefully quickly, though I will admit that I don't always check that very often because we don't have a ton of listeners. So we're not that famous yet. But it's SOPHOMOROS official@gmail.com if you want to chat with us. And until next time, may Christ be exalted.